You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they come into us. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political and PR consultant, Leon Emirali, and the journalist and author, Christina Patterson. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Observer carries a poll which suggests that UK voters would rather see Keir Starmer focused on securing closer ties with the EU rather than the US under Donald Trump. The Telegraph hears that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is warning Labour MPs and peers not to let inter-party squabbling get in the way of her growth agenda. The Sunday Express reports on a fresh batch of protests by farmers over the Chancellor's planned changes to inheritance tax. It's understood major retailers, including Tesco, M&S and Aldi, have also voiced their concerns. The Mirror also features the Chancellor and her assertion she will deliver for the working people. The Sunday Times leads on the Southport stabbings and says a report into the attack will uncover a number of failures by authorities. The Mail on Sunday leads with presenter Wyn Evans being caught on tape making a sexually inappropriate remark to a female colleague at the launch of the Strictly Come Dancing tour. He has since apologised, calling his language inappropriate and unacceptable. The Sun reports on the Holly Willoughby murder and kidnapping plot, with the presenter claiming that she's had a tough time following the emergence of the plan. The Sunday People has word of a new videotape featuring the late gangster Ronnie Kray. And the Star leans on boffins again, this time to tell us that women find bald men irresistible. And it's mostly down to their confidence. I wonder who we could ask about that one. We are joined tonight by Leon Emirali and Christina Patterson. We're not going to look at that story. No, and we're going to concentrate on much more serious matters, starting off with the Observer and their front page. Israel hails female soldiers' homecoming, and we see the photo there of Daniela Gilboa on her way home, freed from captivity, more than a year, 15 months in captivity, being held by Hamas. Christina.
Yes, well, what a day for the friends and family and parents of these young women. What they went through was obviously horrific. And one of the soldiers, Naama Levy, or Levi, she was filmed. There was footage of her shortly after the Hamas attack when she was bundled into the back of a car. And clearly there had been sexual violence because there was bloodstains in the seat of her trousers. And she was evidently in enormous distress. So goodness only knows what these young women have been through. Thank goodness they are out. There's a fifth soldier who should have been, female soldier, who should have been released today and apparently will be released tomorrow. So, you know, good news, clearly. The price has been horrific, absolutely horrific. And what's very distressing about these scenes and the scenes last Sunday when the first hostages in this bout were released were the orchestration, the choreography of having Hamas soldiers in their black masks, looking extremely sinister with their faces covered, showing or trying to show very clearly who's in charge. And the message they are sending is that Hamas has not been destroyed and that Hamas will again be in charge. And from what we hear of the aid pouring in after the ceasefire, Hamas are indeed again in charge. They are taking charge of a lot of the aid. They are absolutely determined to regain control of Gaza. And so I think we can safely say at the moment, very sadly, this ceasefire is not looking like the beginnings of a peace agreement. I'm sure absolutely all of us wish it was, but it doesn't look like it at the moment.
Leon, do you agree with that? Or do you think that, from what we can see, we are going through the stages? There have been complications because one of the hostages that was named to be released today. That did not come to fruition.
Yeah, and that was a civilian hostage, and I think therefore there is a great deal of anxiety about their well-being, and let's hope that does happen and does come to pass. I think that we can show some optimism that there is movement now. There is a willingness of both sides to obviously negotiate this ceasefire. The question is, there is clearly a great deal of distrust on both sides, and perhaps Donald Trump becoming president has focused minds, and therefore there's led to this, this breakthrough, which is good news on a personal level for these families. But there is lots to go through, and I think that the flip side of this is 200 Gazans have been released from prison. Potentially they are people who have committed crimes and maybe harbour terrorist views. What happens to those 200 individuals then go back into society, and are they going to cause more issues in this particular conflict? So I think it's good news. Let's look at the optimistic side of this, but I do share some of that pessimism that let's hope this lasts. It might not.
Well, some of those, of course, are to be deported, so they're not all returning to their previous homes. But if we have a look at the Express next up, their headline, "Free at last," and the hostages that have been released, smiling faces, but, as you say, could be hiding terrible anguish.
Terrible anguish. And they had the sort of sad thing is, or one of the many sad things is that, Naama Levy had only just begun her military service when she was, as it seems, raped and kidnapped. I mean, these poor young women who were serving their country, and the horrific price they have paid for it, though clearly it's less of a price than many people paid on that day and subsequently who were attacked by Hamas. I mean, it's just, thank goodness they are out, huge joy. And to see the footage, as we did last Sunday, of people released and hugging their families, it's almost impossible to imagine the agony those people have been through, not knowing if they would ever see them again, not knowing what state they were in, not knowing if they were healthy. So, I mean, it is certainly a day of celebration for these women and for their families, absolutely, yeah.
But also renewed highlighting of the terrible torment that the families who are still waiting for their loved ones to come home are going through, and they are demanding that there be action now.
Yeah, 477 days is how long these hostages have been in captivity. I mean, unbelievably devastating for the individuals, unbelievably devastating for the families. And actually, the numbers of these 4 soldiers captured and hopefully a 5th coming soon, that's a small number. A lot of others have lost their lives or are still being held, and therefore there needs to be a great deal of coordination and hopefully there is a resolution that enables those families to feel the same level of joy that we saw on those screens when those families are being reunited. It's the best we can hope for.
But tempered by the fact that there are still hostages to come home. Let's move on to the Observer and a bit of politics. We're told that a poll is suggesting that British people are wanting Sir Keir Starmer to move closer to Europe and not to the United States and Donald Trump. What's the detail of this report, Christina?
Yes, there's been a survey, an MRP survey of almost 15,000 people by YouGov for the Best for Britain think tank, which shows that more people in every constituency in England, Scotland and Wales back closer arrangements with the EU rather than closer transatlantic arrangements with the US. And I mean, there seems to be some strange game going on, and I'm not sure. Clearly, Keir Starmer has always felt that Brexit is just a thorn in his side that he has to ignore. Everybody knows it has caused catastrophic economic damage to this country. Even Kemi Badenoch has recently said that it has not been a success. Nobody seemed to have a recipe for how it could be a success. Everyone's just said it hasn't been done properly. But because Keir Starmer was determined not to, as he would see it, reopen the wounds of the referendum and the horrific polarisation that arose as a result of it. And he was determined not to alienate those who'd voted for Brexit, including a very high number of people in the Red Wall who were a constituency he needed to get on side. He seems to be absolutely determined to have as little to do with the EU as possible and constantly saying we can't rejoin the customs union, no, we can't renegotiate. So any renegotiation seems to be completely at the edges and is unlikely to make very much of an economic difference. The fact that he is more focused on the US, I mean, we'll see, but clearly Trump is very, very hostile to Keir Starmer. Elon Musk has made it absolutely clear that he wants to oust Keir Starmer and replace him with Nigel Farage. He's changed his mind about Nigel Farage, so he clearly wants to oust Nigel Farage now and replace him with some other reform figure. But the US could not be much more hostile to the UK at the moment, and they've made it very clear that any trade agreements will come at a very high price, which may well include things like higher prices for drugs in the NHS, softening the influence of NICE, which determines the price of drugs, farming agricultural products. Before they talked about chlorinated chicken and so on. So I don't know how Starmer finds a way through this. I think it's a very, very challenging situation, but I think many people in this country are now tearing their hair out about Brexit, the disaster it's been, and the fact that the Labour government seem to be refusing to do anything much to remedy it.
But Leon, this article is suggesting that people are at odds with what Christina's describing as Sir Keir Starmer wanting to move closer to the United States and Donald Trump. And they're saying that actually, no, we should move closer to the EU. It says that even in Nigel Farage's seat of Clacton, more people think the UK is better off trading more with its neighbours on the continent than with the US under the Reform UK leader's ally, Donald Trump.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it, that you trade with your partners that are closest to you. It just, makes logical sense. So I get that, and I understand why a lot of the public share that sentiment. I think that there is part of what I disagree with what Christina said, which is there is an opportunity now for the UK to build some sort of relationship, some sort of trading relationship with the US under Donald Trump, given he hates the EU. And I think what Donald Trump's trying to do is divide the UK, put Starmer in a position where he has to choose between the EU and America. Yet we were told during the Brexit campaign that we'd have the opportunity to do both, that we could trade globally with the EU on some things and with the US on others. And I think that's going to be the challenge now for Starmer, is can he make that happen? Can he get the best of both worlds, or the, cakeism, as some people might like to call it? I think that'd be very tough, because obviously the EU are going to want to make sure that Brexit is as least of a success as it can be, to not want other nations to do the same thing. So it's a problem for Starmer. I don't think necessarily the UK is in a terrible position if we can negotiate with the with the EU and the US. But we're a small island. America's a huge economy, and I think that's going to be the problem: is that the negotiation is stacked against us in that sense. So we're going to have to make sure it's a pretty good deal if we're going to come out smelling of roses. Yeah, and also identify whether being forced to choose, as you suggest, that's an interesting concept. Christina and Leon, thank you very much for the moment. We are going to take a break now. Coming up, in the unlikely event it happens, why might Donald Trump need Britain's permission to buy Greenland? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
I'm Alistair Bunkle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem.
The only way into Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military.
We've just reached the centre of Khan Yunis.
The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
Sky News, get the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Leon and Christina. Let's have a look at, well, not Rachel Reeves, literally, but a story concerning her on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, and she's warning MPs and peers not to stand in the way of growth. And this is about sort of intra-Labour squabbles.
Yes, well, poor Rachel Reeves. It's not going well for her at the moment, is it? And clearly there was this idea that she could say, let there be growth. And this was a central part of their campaigning of the electoral campaign. And there has not been growth. Or, I mean, there actually is some growth, but not as much as she would hope. And certainly the budget doesn't seem to have been terribly helpful in terms of you know, the changes that she's made and the effect that's had particularly on business. But now, because their infrastructure programmes and house building programmes are absolutely central to this vision of growth, she is saying, she's essentially taking on Labour MPs who are threatening to block potential planning applications. And the default for years has been to block. And my partner's an architect, and, you know, the power that tiny campaign groups have to block developments is absolutely enormous. So I personally think she's right, because otherwise there will not be the house building that's necessary. And as we know, many, many people, including many young people, are really struggling to find housing. The trouble with being an MP is you always have this conflict of interest between, or this clash between your constituents, and obviously nobody wants a housing development in their backyard, and your duty as a member of a party that's in government, which has promised extra house building. So she's basically saying, you know, look to your national duty rather than your local duty. And it's interesting that she's saying, apparently said to the Telegraph, that she's urging people to that if anyone who's attempting to block the planning infrastructure bill will be defying the will of the country. That's a very kind of Boris Johnson Brexit statement. And I do think that Labour are trying this, the odd Trumpian and Johnsonian statement at the moment, to try and get a slightly firmer tone going, because they've been told they're so bad at communication. Who knows if it will work,
Leon,
but I support her.
Do you think she's going to head off dissent with this type of talk?
Well, I don't know, because, clearly there needs to be something in this country that enables us to go for this growth that is, the mythical thing that's underpinning all of Labour's plans at the minute is we are going to get to growth. So we have to have a roadmap getting there. It is NIMBYism, not just house building, but big infrastructure projects like new runways at airports, like building the data centres to power the new AI that the government want to support. Those type of big infrastructure projects have to happen somewhere. And I think what's going to happen here is you're going to have Labour MPs with wafer-thin majorities in a lot of instances who are going to be thinking, well, hang on a minute, if I back this unpopular project in my constituency, I'm going to get booted out in 4 years, 5 years' time. So that's where the crux of this is. But the country has to go for growth. We have to be more open to these types of projects, and I hope she succeeds. I think it's a good move for her.
But critics would say it gets rid of the balancing and the checks, because environmental impact assessments are going to be scrapped to be replaced with simpler and clearer reports.
Well, they should be. Look at that bat tunnel that's cost 100 million or whatever. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
Let's move on to the Express. National show of unity over tax disaster. This is the farmers back out demonstrating against inheritance tax. Leon.
Yeah, it's clearly unpopular, and we've now got the weight, if you like, of retail giants, Tesco, Aldi, M&S, who have said, we agree with the farmers, we support the farmers. And, I'm torn on this, because on one hand, yes, I think it's important that we have food security in this country. It's important that we do have a vibrant farming community. But on the other hand, the fact that people have to pay tax in this country, we all have to pay tax in this country. Why should necessarily farmers be exempt? So, I do have sympathy with the farmers, but not necessarily loads of sympathy. And I think there should be more that the government is doing beyond just inheritance tax to support farmers. Sorry to talk about Brexit again, but Brexit has harmed the agricultural industry in this country. I think we can agree on that, and therefore there needs to be a different way forward for the industry. Whether that's through adopting higher tech or making things cheaper for the industry, it shouldn't all just be about dodging inheritance tax.
Christine, I'm going to move on, if you don't mind, just because we're running out of time. So take us to the Times newspaper, and can you explain why Donald Trump would need to ask Britain's permission if he wants to buy Greenland?
Yes, well, I think we can be fairly confident that he won't. And, of course, this thing that started off as we thought a joke, well, we weren't sure whether it was a joke, but it sounded so crazy that we thought it must be a joke, has now become deadly serious, because on a phone call to the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, apparently he was incredibly bullying about it and basically saying, you have to give us Greenland or we'll slap gargantuan tariffs on trade. So the worst possible thing to have in anybody's inbox, essentially, to have Trump breathing down your neck and planning to steal a swathe of land that has been essentially yours for many, many years. But according to who is this guy? He is called, someone who... Woodrow Wilson tried to buy, then the US president tried to get a deal with Greenland and didn't succeed, and was told that the United Kingdom would have to have first refusal on it because Canada was at the time a British Dominion and Greenland was only a few miles away. It was logical that the British would have first right to buy. So apparently there is this agreement, which I can't imagine Trump will take very seriously, that we get first refusal. Clearly we don't want Greenland, but it is frightening that Trump is making threats about territory that does not belong to him.
Well, the agreement's over 100 years old, so does it stand?
I'm sure Trump will find it as a means to try and get the UK back on his side, but maybe it's that way of us ingratiating with the new president.
Leon and Christine, thank you so much for taking us through the papers. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Israeli hostages back with their families, Palestinian prisoners freed. We have both sides of the latest exchange.